Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Peaceful Mind.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Munira Hussain, and we are here to tell you the story of how we came up with this podcast. And Mariam, can you believe we're almost launching? We're almost at that point.
I cannot believe it. Because you know what? Even though we've been speaking about this for a while, it's been an idea in my head probably for longer. I think from the first time I attended a conference on Muslim mental health in the States in 2022, that was the first year that I attended that conference. I just felt so energized when I got back from the conference that I wanted to do what I had seen there being done in our community. And I was looking for a platform to share, with the community, to share information, to talk about mental health and to talk about it in a way that is that can be relatable. Mustn't be this scary thing that we can't talk about, but just to open up conversations. And so since then, I've been having this idea of what kind of platform to use to actually start this conversation. So it's been a while.
Yeah, I think we met was it 2021 or 2022? I think.
It was 2022.
Yeah, it was.
Actually, I think we met 2021 at Subtle for the first time, but it was at the writing retreat in 2022 that
we got to know each other.
yeah, we got to know each other. Yeah.
That was just before you went on Hajj, and I remember you were telling me about your research, and I was thinking, yo, this speaks to me as a Muslim. Because maybe tell us a little bit about your research, Mariam.
Must just say that you were the first person I told that I was going to Hajj because I got the SMS at that retreat.
Wow, we went to
So
retreat, I
you were the
remember.
first person I told. So yeah, so I think in thinking about, I mean, you're also doing a PhD, and you know that thinking, conceptualizing an idea for your PhD is probably the most difficult part of the PhD.
Yeah.
And I had so many different ideas because I've got so many different interests. And I remember one day I was talking to a colleague and I was saying to her, I was talking to her about the Muslim community, and I was talking to her about my work as a clinical psychologist within the community and some of the things that I had experienced going into psychology, just studying psychology, some of the things that I've been told, things that get said about, the kind of work that I do. And I told her that, I'm interested in just changing that narrative, because I felt like it was still very much some of the things, around working as a psychologist, firstly as a Muslim, and then even just type of work and type of community that you'll work with. So I remember speaking to her about it, and I'd had another idea for my PhD. It was something about parenting. And she said, well, why aren't you doing that?
Mm.
If this is something that you're so interested in, because she said when I spoke to her about it, she said I was lighting up, and I was very passionate, and she said, why aren't you talking about that then? Why won't you study that for your PhD? And I said, you know what, that's not a bad idea. Let me think about that. And what I wanted to do at the time was to look at how to sort of adjust the kind of therapies that we use, the modalities that we use for a Muslim community. But then obviously in reading and researching and talking to my supervisor, we realized that we actually didn't have much information about mental health within the Muslim community. And so before we can do any of those things, we actually first need to understand, how do Muslims think about mental health? How do they understand? How do they explain mental health? And what are the attitudes? What are the beliefs around it? And so that's where my PhD study was born.
Yeah, yeah. And that spoke to me on a personal and a professional level. So I'm an occupational therapist, also doing my PhD in the field of mental health, but I also have personal experience with mental health challenges. So after my third child, so I had these adjustment issues after my first child and my second child. After my third child, I was diagnosed with postnatal depression. And then that kind of continued. So, I went through a whole process of initially speaking to my GP about my difficulties, and then eventually ended up with a psychiatrist, and as well seeing a psychologist who I still see to this day. It is amazing. But through that journey, I faced so many unhelpful beliefs and unhelpful comments that people made. Like, I went to a medical doctor one time and he told me, drink more Zamzam. And I thought, yes, I know I must drink more Zamzam, but it doesn't help that a medical doctor tells me I'm not here for you to tell me to drink more Zamzam. But then also at the same time, when I was going through my mental health journey, learning about things like mindfulness, spoke very closely to me of Islam and Salah and Dua and Dhikr. So a lot of the practices that were taught in promoting mental health, I thought linked very nicely with Islamic practices and traditions. And speaking to you, I realized that that resonated with you as well.
Definitely. And I think, again, it comes from our history also, the kind of things that people think about when you're going to university and you're studying psychology. And I think people's sometimes misconceptions about what psychology is. But I found that and I always tell people that I didn't find psychology, psychology found me. And that's a story for another day about how I got there. But the more I studied the more I studied psychology, the more I thought to myself, this resonates so well with me as a Muslim, because a lot of these things that I'm learning are actually practices that you find in Islam. Some of it that we've forgotten, but that is there, and I felt like on my journey of my studies that it actually brought me closer to Islam than moving me further away. So it was an interesting experience to study psychology, and an interesting experience to do this PhD study, because with my study, trying to understand how Muslims make sense. I'm a Muslim myself, so I'm almost like caught between these two worlds. I remember one of the participants said actually like she's stuck between two worlds, and so that's pretty much for me the same. I'm between two worlds, so I've studied psychology. I work as a clinical psychologist, but I'm also Muslim from this Muslim community that I'm, conducting my study in. And so I have this in group, knowledge on both sides. And so it's a very interesting position to be in, to see things from both perspectives.
Yeah, they call it the insider outsider perspective
Yeah.
in research, right?
Yes,
No?
exactly.
Of the technical term.
Yes. Yeah, so it's been interesting. And you were talking about your own experience, and shukran so much for sharing about that. I remember with the so I my PhD, I conducted interviews with different stakeholder groups, and so one of those groups were, from the Muslim community, and then I had a group, psychologists, and I had a group of Islamic scholars as well. And I remember, and I think I shared this with you, that doing those interviews and hearing people's stories, I was so touched. I actually it I felt very emotional many times when I was doing the interviews, and then afterwards when I was re-listening to the interviews and doing the data analysis. Many times I felt quite emotional at the experiences that they went through. You know, being diagnosed with a mental health condition, and like I said, sometimes hearing these unhelpful things. Um, that it's got to do with their low iman, or that they're not performing enough salah, or they're not reading enough Quran, or their belief in Allah is not strong enough. And so it dismisses the experience that they have. And I remember sitting with that, feeling really heavy about that. And then I interviewed the Islamic scholars, and I think this is really where this idea for this platform came about, is that when I spoke to the Islamic scholars and heard how they think about mental health, and they shared stories from the Nabi Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's life. They shared hadith, they shared stories, narrations, happenings that had occurred at the time. I thought to myself, the Nabi Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a psychologist, just in terms of how he approached people, how he dealt with things, the wisdom that he used, and the kind of space that he created for people. And I thought to myself, why is there this discrepancy between how the community understands mental health and versus how the scholars understand mental health? And I thought, I need to find a way to bring these two together, where people can be privy to this information, and people can also understand and hear this, and so that it can be normalized that, this is an experience like any other. It's a health condition like any other, and that there's room for mental health, within Islam. In fact, our mental health is part of our holistic health. And earlier scholars, especially earlier Islamic scholars, they always focused on holistic health. It was always part of the human being. So yeah, I kept thinking, how do I bring this two together? What platform do I use? And I've been thinking about different things. And then finally I thought, you know what? We need to get with the times. Podcasts are the thing right now. And so let's try this avenue. And so here we are.
Yeah, yeah. And our slogan is healing through faith, culture, and conversation.
Mm.
And I think a lot of the the helpful and the unhelpful beliefs come from culture, where we think it's faith, but actually it comes from our cultural tradition.
Yeah.
And we are such a melting pot of cultures in Cape Town and in South Africa. But often we think what we think is religion is actually culture. And maybe that partly explains the discrepancy between what the Islamic scholars believe versus what the community's attitudes are. And I also think it's also not, yeah, it's difficult, man. When you first get diagnosed with a mental health condition, then it's like you think it's you the problem. You the problem. I'm not
Exactly.
coping. I'm not, I should be coping better than this. I should be looking after myself better. And then you realize a whole lot of other people are in the same position. And I think that's partly our aim with creating this podcast
Yes,
is to
definitely.
open the conversation for people to realize you're not alone. There are lots of other people who are struggling with the same, and maybe as a source of support.
No, exactly. I mean, I think I experienced this a lot with not only with participants of my study, but also with people that I work with in my practice. When they first come, there is that idea that there's something wrong with me. That like you said, that I'm not coping. That how is everyone else coping and I'm not, and just normalizing experiences and sharing with people and them just understanding that actually it's not just me. There are other people who have similar experiences, maybe not in the same way, but similar experiences. It immediately takes away that I don't know what word to use for it, but it takes away that initial just belief about the self. Also, like why am I not coping? The other thing we spoke, I mean, we have culture within our slogan, and I think it's so important to bring that into the conversation because, like you said, sometimes there are beliefs that we hold on to, thinking that it's within our Islamic traditions, but actually sometimes it's cultural. And I think as South Africans, like I said, we've got a boiling pot of different cultures and religions, and it's great. But also our history plays a big role in how we deal with things. And we need to understand that our parents, their parents, they came through a specific system of oppression and injustice, and so they were often also very much in survival mode. And so sometimes those kind of unhelpful things that are being said, it's almost still like people are still in survival mode, as if they are still just kind of like needing to function, needing to just get through things, get through the day, and move on. Um, but we are no longer in that kind of position, and there is room to slow down, to deal with things. To We didn't have the luxury. Our parents and grandparents didn't have the luxury of being able to deal with all of these things at the time because it was about survival. But we are not in survival, so it's also understanding that part of our history. It's also part of how we experience things, and then being able to separate that, so we know, okay, this is something we can deal with, and this is something that we have to park.
Yeah. I think another aim with the podcast is creating a community.
Mm.
So we talk about individualism as the
Mm.
kind of Western way of doing things, that it's all about the individual person. Whereas South African culture, Islamic culture is about collectivism. It's about the
Yes.
group, it's
Ubuntu.
about Ubuntu. Yeah. And so creating a space like this where we can all talk to each other. I feel like I also just want to say that Mariam, you and I are doing this for the first time. And we're doing
Yes.
it with the best of intentions, but I'm sure that we are making mistakes. So if there's anything that we do that offends anyone, or anything that we say that is maybe offensive, then please do let us know. Drop us an email, drop us a message. We're both very open to feedback.
Yes.
And also likewise, if there's any topics that you want us to cover in future sessions, then we're happy to do that. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, we're starting out, so the plan was, I mean, we thought about waiting until things could, I mean, can things ever be perfect also, but we thought about waiting until things were where we wanted it to be. But you know what? Time, is moving. Like I said, 2022, that was 3 years ago when I had first thought about, how do we create space to have these kind of conversations, and in a way that people can feel comfortable to conversate, about mental health. And so I didn't want to waste any more time. And I thought, you know what? I said to Mundra, let's just make a start. We'll build it as we go along. We'll learn and we'll grow. But I think the important thing was just to make that start, that initial start. And so here we are, making that
Yeah.
initial start.
Yeah, and maybe our listeners would also be interested to know that Mariam, you and I get together once a week, at least once a week. We sit together and we work on our PhDs together. And sometimes those conversations that we have in between, writing and reading and working are so valuable. And we sit there and think, yo, if couldn't we have this with other people? Other people would also be interested to hear this. And so that's why we're doing this. We're trying to open up the conversation and we invite feedback and we invite comments.
And building that sense of community, that, like Munira said, you're not alone.
Mm.
Um, and just, I think, I mean, for me personally, I feel like there's so much. Okay, I come from a big family. We are 7 children. And so for me, I've always had a community. I've always had a community that, that supports me, that encourages me. And I just, wish for that for everyone. And so sometimes we're not fortunate enough to have that kind of community, within our own families, but there's no reason why we can't create that kind of communities for each other and be that kind of community for each other. So that's also, I think, something that I always think about. That's also something that I want to share with us.
Yeah. You said earlier that our parents were in crisis and in survival mode, and we're not in crisis anymore. But I'm also aware that there may well be listeners who are still in crisis,
Yes.
who are in survival mode. Is there anything you want to say to them?
You know, when you are in crisis, when you are in survival mode, there is help. I think that's what I want to say is that there is help. There is support. I think sometimes, especially when you feel like you're alone in something, the first instinct is to try to figure it out on your own. And sometimes you can. I mean, look, we all different. We have different experiences. Sometimes we have an experience that we can kind of figure out on our own. But the times when we are not able to figure it out on our own, there is support, and reach out. There is support, there is help. So when you are when you recognize, and I always say to my clients, you are the expert of your life. You know exactly when something is happening. You will recognize it in your patterns. You'll see, I'm not sleeping well anymore. I'm being restless at night, or I usually run thrice a week. Now I suddenly don't feel like running. I usually like to attend family functions. Now I find myself, not feeling to go. So you recognize, you will start to see it. And so when you start to see that and look at what's going on, and if you feel like it's something that you can't handle on your own, then please do reach out, because there is support. We are here. There's always someone.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that you're always very open about is that access to therapy is an issue. Not everyone can afford
Mm,
private therapy. Not everyone is comfortable going to therapy. And so we're also trying to share lessons and stories that can be helpful to people outside of that space.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have this very ambitious goal to work towards prevention, rather than needing to cure. And I think, working towards prevention means informing people, educating so people can be aware. And I think, I mean, the aim is to promote good mental health. And I think if you are able to, make use of the tools that help you for good mental health, the risk of mental health conditions will be less. So the idea is to also try and share things with the community, try and share tools, resources, even stories. I think sometimes we learn from others' experiences as well. So trying to share whatever we can that can help build good mental health, so that we don't end up being at risk for any kind of mental health condition.
Shukran so much, Mariam. May this be a successful venture and may it reach many, many people. And may we learn and do better in future.
I mean to that. Definitely. I mean, we start with Bismillah. We know we're both doing this, for the community. I think both of us, we're very similar, and I think that's probably why we became friends. We have this love for community, and so, like you said, not everybody has access to individual and to private therapy. So it's, how can we take this outside of the therapy room? Beyond the physical walls. And so hopefully, inshallah, with this platform, we'll reach more people.
Amin. Amin. Shukran, Maria. And now it's Bismillah.
So yeah,
We look forward to our first episode.
definitely. See you all on Friday.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.